In this lesson, we're going to learn how to test our game on an Android device. The first step that you want to complete before you actually do that is to perform a few checks. So if you want to just click on your game settings tab, there are a few things you want to make sure are correct. For instance, make sure that your display settings are correct. In this case, 320 by 480 is what we want. When you come down to the mobile tab, and then we click on display, we've already looked here before, but this is just part of the checks that we perform before a test. If you come down to the bottom here, you have these scale options. Well, the Google Play Store has restrictions on the file sizes that can be uploaded. And because of that, it's usually best to exclude higher resolution graphics unless they're absolutely necessary for the aesthetic of your game. If you're really targeting high definition tablet devices or something to that effect with a lot of pixels. But usually, I find that anything over the 2x graphic threshold is unnecessary, especially since this is really a mobile game that we're working with. So we'll set it as such, and then we click OK. Other settings that we want to be confident are correct are the certificate settings. If we come over to certificates for Android, we need to make an Android certificate. We'll provide it with an alias. So we can call it Universal Cert. The reason I say that is because, unlike with the App Store for iOS, the Android Store or the Google Play Store allows us to use the same certificate with all of our games. So you don't need to create a new one each time. We'll put in some kind of a password. Just remember exactly what it is, because you'll need that to access the certificate later. Stencyl will save this for you anyway. So let's set a password of my secret password. Okay. You might want to be a little more cryptic than that in practice. First and last name, Richard Sneed. Company, Cybermet Games. And IOR is the country code for Ireland. Okay, and that's created. So we now have a certificate. Uncertified apps can only be used on a mobile device that has a setting enabled for developers basically to work with their uncertified apps for testing purposes. That means that you wouldn't be able to upload an uncertified app to the App Store. So creating this cert is an essential step. Okay, well, we have that done. Now, we also need to come back here over to our PC handler. And we'll also open up the player ship to which the PC handler is attached, and come over to behaviors, PC handler, and we're going to increase the speed to 9. Okay. Then you just choose the Android option for your target platform for testing purposes. Click on Log Viewer. Click the X to clear the log viewer. Make sure you have your Android device attached. For instance, I'm using a Sony Xperia phone. And then click Test Game. Okay, and basically then the progress of the build is going to be chronicled in our log viewer, so we can see if there are any errors that we encounter in building the game. And you can also see that we have this simple prompt here telling us at what stage we are in the build process. Right now we're at the compile stage. Eventually that gets to the final stage, which is sending to device. And that means that our APK, which is the file that installs the game on our Android device, it's like an exe file for Windows. It's called APK, that's for Android. It generates that APK, and then you see sending to device appear here where compiling is showing at the moment. This is where people run into trouble sometimes. Depending on your setup on your device, for whatever reason, it may or may not work. Stencyl may or may not be able to push it to your device. You have to make sure that you've enabled non-Google Play apps, non-store apps, so that it can do that. But even when you have enabled non-store apps or development apps, it still sometimes will fail. So I have sending to device on the screen now, and it's attempting to send it to my device. It may or may not work. Sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't, as I said. So if it doesn't for you, then what you have to do is just click debug and view games folder. Go to games generated, and then the name of your project. And in the export folder, under Android, bin, and bin again, you will find your APK. Vertical Space Shooter Demo Debug Aligned APK, or just Vertical Space Shooter Demo Debug APK. So it doesn't look like it's going to work in my case, which means what I need to do is copy the APK, Control C, and then browse to my phone. So give me just a moment. And you may need to complete these steps also. It's very possible. And you'll have to enable media transfer mode, at which point you should be able to go inside of your Xperia or inside of your Android device. We'll see, can we get into internal storage? There we are. We'll go inside of our downloads folder. This is how I like to do it, and just paste in the APK, which is only 16 megabytes. Great, so now the APK is on the phone, but it's not installed yet. So we're going to cut to a video of me installing this on my particular device. Now you have to be aware that depending on the device and the version of Android you have installed, obviously there will be an amount of variation in this process, but this is going to give you the essence. So the next thing you'll see is me working with my phone. Here I am with my iPad and I'm videoing my Xperia. So I'm going to swipe to open up, and then I need to go to any kind of an application that can handle file management. So I use File Commander, which you should be able to see quite clearly there. I'm going to click on File Commander, and then I'm going to go to Vertical Space Shooter in there. But firstly, you have to, of course, have enabled the installation of APKs directly, and if you haven't, it will prompt you to do so anyway. So you may or may not have to complete that step now. You can see that I already have it installed. It's saying, do you want to install an update to this existing application? Your data will be lost. I'm going to click install, because I don't want to have two versions. If this is the first time you've completed this lesson, then you likely don't have a version of the game on your phone already. You have to wait a few moments, of course. And Android will tell you at some point that the game is done. Application installed. Okay. Now, we can click on the open button, and if I turn up the volume, you'll hear that thing. And I can fly around, and I can shoot. And as you can see, everything is working as it should. Great, so that's how you test on an Android device. Relatively simple.